Paul came to me, his eyes wide with concern. "Yo, Gene, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice heavy with a sense of urgency. Without hesitation, I looked at him and said, "That dude's dead, Paul." The words came out as a matter of fact, cold and final, but Paul shook his head and replied, "No, dog, he just got hit, it's trauma." I stood firm in my belief. "Man, he's pissed and on himself, he's dead." The truth was too hard to deny, no matter how much anyone tried to sugarcoat it. At that moment, the empire that had once seemed invincible was falling apart. The bad boy label, once the epitome of power and success in the music industry, was crumbling before everyone's eyes. People had their eyes glued to the Netflix documentary produced by 50 Cent, which had set the internet ablaze. But for one man, the documentary only told part of the story. He believed it glossed over the darkest, most dangerous secrets. That man was Gene Deal. Gene had always operated from the shadows, quietly protecting Diddy when the cameras weren't rolling. He was the one who made sure the empire's dirty laundry stayed hidden, the one who ensured that things never got out of hand in public. But now, after years of keeping secrets, Gene was ready to break his silence, and what he had to say would rock everything. Gene began unraveling a tale filled with bird sacrifices, secret shootouts, and the real reason why some people went to jail while others walked free. The truth was so dark, so twisted, that it seemed like something from a movie, something no one could ever truly believe. You think you know the bad boy story, you don't, not until you hear Gene's side. It all started with Miss Hilton, Diddy's first baby mother and the mother of his first son, Justin Combs. She'd always stayed quiet, lived a life far from the spotlight, but when the documentary dropped, Miss couldn't stay silent anymore. Miss Hilton had always been the private one, the one who didn't indulge in the drama of the entertainment industry. She had stayed out of the mess, choosing to raise her son away from the chaos that came with being associated with Diddy. But when the documentary aired, it was as if the floodgates had opened. Miss felt a wave of pain, frustration, and anger, all of which she poured out in a public post. For the first time, she laid bare the emotional toll that the relentless harassment had taken on her and Justin. In her post, Miss revealed how the harassment had become unbearable, how she and her son were being dragged through the mud by the public's misconceptions. "I'm a private person," Miss wrote. "I don't air my business out, but this time I had to speak up. The harassment has gone too far." She expressed how heartbreaking it was to see her son caught up in a web of rumors and lies, to see her family's name dragged through the dirt by forces they couldn't control. She accused the media and the public of misleading everyone about who she and her son truly were. But it wasn't just the documentary that Miss was angry about. She pointed a finger at Gene Deal, accusing him of fueling the flames of public harassment. Gene's interviews had done nothing but stir up trouble, she said. He had kept alive a rumor that had lingered in the streets for years, the rumor that Justin Combs might not be Diddy's biological son. The rumor had always suggested that Anthony Wolf Jones, Diddy's former head of security and close friend, was Justin's real father. Wolf was a tough, no-nonsense guy, the kind of person who commanded respect. Everyone in Diddy's circle knew him, feared him, and respected him. When Miss lashed out, she wasn't just venting frustration, she was accusing Gene Deal of keeping this painful rumor alive. She felt like Gene was letting people believe that Wolf and not Diddy was Justin's father. This was personal. It was a direct assault on Diddy's legacy, his family, and the history they'd worked so hard to build. Gene Deal saw the post and wasn't going to let it slide. Gene went on an interview with The Art of Dialogue to set the record straight. He was taken aback by Miss accusations. "I was shocked when I saw her post," he said. "Someone sent it to me and I couldn't believe it." But he wasn't about to back down. Looking straight into the camera, Gene addressed Miss directly. "How am I harassing you, Miss?" he asked. "I've never harassed you. I've always been a protector for you and your family. I've never once come for you." He went on to explain that Miss anger stemmed from the fact that Gene hadn't stepped up to publicly deny the rumor about Wolf. She wanted him to go on record and say that Wolf wasn't the father, but Gene made it clear that wasn't his job. "It's not for me to clarify," he said. "I'm just telling my truth. If the rumors are out there, that's not my fault." Gene stood his ground. "I've never come for you, not once. I've always had your back," he reiterated. But he also made it clear that he wasn't going to lie to protect it. No one anymore, not even Diddy. For years, he had kept the secrets, made sure that the skeletons stayed hidden in the closet. But no more. Gene wasn't going to carry the weight of the empire's dark past any longer. His loyalty to Diddy and the bad boy legacy had come with a cost, and now he was exposing the truth. This back and forth between Gene and Miss wasn't just about a rumor. It was about the unraveling of everything that the bad boy empire had stood for. The cracks had been there for years, but now they were impossible to ignore. The empire that had once been united was falling apart. People who had been close, family even, were now at odds, fighting over rumors, secrets, and lies. Gene had become the unwitting whistleblower. By telling his story, he was forcing everyone to face the truth, the uncomfortable, messy truth about the empire. It was a reckoning for everyone involved. Diddy, once the king of the empire, was now exposed. Miss once the quiet mother of his child, was now a key player in this battle for the truth. And Gene was the last man standing, the one who had survived the chaos, the gunshots, and the betrayals. Now he was telling a story that no one had ever heard before, a story that was darker and more complicated than anyone had realized. The truth was finally coming out, and with it, the end of an era. The bad boy empire was no longer the powerful force it had once been. And as Gene spoke, people were beginning to realize that the empire's rise to power had come at a great cost, a cost that no one was willing to talk about until now. The consequences of those dark secrets were finally being revealed, and there was no turning back. The rift between Massey and Gene wasn't just personal, it was the symbol of a larger collapse. The bad boy family, once a united front, was now splintering apart. What had been an unbreakable bond between members was crumbling under the weight of accusations, secrets, and betrayals. Massey's public outbursts and Gene's candid interviews were putting their dirty laundry on display for the world to see. And it wasn't just the documentary that had ignited the flames. It was the accumulation of years of unresolved tension, bitterness, and deception that had been quietly building up beneath the surface. For Gene, this was more than just a fight to clear his name. It was a battle for truth, a refusal to remain complicit in a world of lies. He wasn't going to let anyone paint him as the villain in a story that he'd lived through, especially not Massey. He made it clear he wasn't her enemy. But at the same time, he wasn't going to lie or protect anyone's secrets anymore. The roots of the tension between Massey and Gene, the pain, and the betrayals all pointed to a night in history that would forever be etched into the fabric of hip-hop, a night that would change everything. To truly understand the depths of the cracks in Bad Boy, we had to go back to December 27, 1999 at Club New York in Manhattan. On that fateful night, Diddy was at the peak of his empire, living a life most could only dream of. He was dating Jennifer Lopez, the biggest star in the world at the time, and their entrance into the club that night was nothing short of spectacular. Diddy and JLO were draped in diamonds and furs, commanding the attention of every person in the room. They were the epitome of power and glamour, flanked by an entourage that only added to the aura of untouchable royalty. With them was a young rapper named Shine, a rising star who had recently signed with Bad Boy. Shine had a deep voice that reminded everyone of the late, great Notorious B.I.G. His hunger for success was palpable, and his loyalty to Diddy was unquestioned. He was eager to prove himself, to make Diddy proud, not knowing that this night, this moment, would change the course of his life forever. The club was packed, the beats were booming, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. But then the mood shifted. A sudden argument broke out between Diddy's crew and another group of men in the club. Some say a man threw money in Diddy's face, a disrespect so monumental in the hip-hop world that it was almost unforgivable. Tensions flared, words were exchanged, and before anyone could react, things escalated. Fists started flying, and then the unthinkable happened. Guns were drawn. Shots rang out and chaos erupted inside the club. People dove for cover, desperately trying to escape the violence unfolding in front of them. When the shots finally stopped ringing, 3 people were injured and the atmosphere shifted from electric to terrifying. Diddy, Jennifer Lopez, and their entourage rushed out of the club, their hearts racing, their lives suddenly in danger. They jumped into a Lincoln Navigator and sped off, trying to escape the madness. What followed was a high-speed chase through the streets of New York City as the police scrambled to catch up. Eventually, the cops managed to stop the vehicle and they found a gun inside. Diddy was arrested. Shine, the young rapper who had been trying to stay out of the trouble, was arrested as well. Even Jennifer Lopez, who had only been a bystander, was briefly detained before being released. The fallout from that night would be nothing short of catastrophic. What followed was a trial that captured the attention of the nation. The charges against Diddy were serious. If convicted, he could face years in prison. His empire, his fortune, and his future were all on the line. Diddy's legal team went into overdrive, bringing in the best lawyers money could buy. Johnny Cochran, the renowned defense attorney who had helped O.J. Simpson secure an acquittal, was brought in to help Diddy fight the charges. But Gene Deal, who had been there through it all, claimed that Diddy's legal defense wasn't the only thing that played a role in his acquittal. According to Gene, something far darker, far more ritualistic was involved. He spoke of an event that took place in the shadows of Central Park, an event that had nothing to do with law or lawyers, but everything to do with power, fate, and a strange, eerie ritual, the bird sacrifice. Gene's story about the bird sacrifice would send chills down anyone's spine. He explained that on the day the verdict was set to be announced, Diddy was consumed with fear and uncertainty. The weight of the trial hung heavy over him. In the quiet moments before the court session, Diddy sought the help of a spiritual advisor. Gene described the scene vividly. Diddy, the man who ruled the entertainment industry with a golden fist, was on his knees in Central Park in the dead of winter. The spiritual advisor, a man Gene described as possessing an eerie calm, held a Bible in his hands and instructed Diddy to kneel on the cold, hard ground. As the man began to chant, smoke swirled around them. Gene said sage or some other incense burning to cleanse and protect. The cold air seemed to thicken and Gene could feel a sense of foreboding. The man began praying over Diddy, his words unintelligible but carrying an energy that seemed to pulse with power. Then the man revealed a small cage containing a white bird, either a dove or a pigeon, something symbolic of peace and purity. But Gene knew that this bird wasn't just a symbol. It was a sacrifice. The spiritual advisor instructed Diddy to release the bird into the air. Diddy did as he was told, but when the bird was thrown into the sky, it didn't soar. Instead, it plummeted to the ground with a sickening thud, dead before it even hit the dirt. Gene believed that the death of that bird was no accident. It wasn't just a misfortune. It was part of a ritual, a dark exchange meant to shift the balance of fate in Diddy's favor. The bird, its life snuffed out so suddenly, took the fall for Diddy's freedom. Gene felt the weight of that moment, the chill that crawled down his spine. He knew then that something much darker than fate was at work. When the verdict came in, Diddy was acquitted. The jury declared him not guilty and he walked free. But the price of that freedom had been paid not by the legal system but by the life of that bird. Shine, on the other hand, was not so lucky. While Diddy walked free, Shine was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Gene couldn't help but see the stark contrast. Diddy had been protected, spared from the consequences, while Shine, the loyal soldier, paid the price. To Gene, it was clear the bird had taken Diddy's fate upon itself, and now Shine would pay the cost. The details of the bird's sacrifice remained shrouded in mystery, but Gene's words carried the weight of truth for those who were willing to listen. He wasn't the only one who saw the dark power behind Diddy's rise to the top, and Gene was determined to tell the world about it. He wasn't just a witness to these events, he was a part of a much larger story, one that would continue to unfold, one revelation at a time. Gene's words echoed with an unsettling truth as he recounted the day Diddy's fate hung in the balance. On the day the verdict was set to be delivered, Gene described how Diddy, a man who thrived on power and control, was consumed by fear. The weight of the charges, the looming possibility of prison, was too much for even him to carry alone. So Gene says Diddy sought out a man, a spiritual advisor, or perhaps a mystic, someone with knowledge of the unseen forces that govern the world around them. Gene, having seen much in his years of service, knew there was something different about this day. On that fateful morning, Diddy traveled to Central Park, away from the prying eyes of the media, away from the hustle of the world, seeking solace or guidance from this unknown figure. Gene had been there too, watching the scene unfold with his own eyes. As he described it, Diddy, the same man who commanded respect from everyone, who demanded to be the center of attention wherever he went, suddenly knelt in the dirt in the middle of the park. This powerful figure, often seen as untouchable, was brought low, humbled by his desperation. The man, holding a Bible in his hands, instructed Diddy to get on his knees. There on the cold ground of Central Park, the world's most powerful music mogul knelt, seeking something he couldn't find in the courts or in the eyes of his lawyers. Gene could see the smoke swirling around them, smoke that Gene believed to be sage, used to cleanse evil spirits, to purify the energy around them. The air was thick with tension as the man began to pray over Diddy. The chanting was soft at first, rising in intensity, until it felt like the very air was vibrating with the energy of something far beyond their understanding. The man placed his hands on Diddy's shoulders as though transferring something unseen from one to the other. The ritual was in full swing and the stakes were high. And then came the moment that would change everything. The man revealed a small cage that had been hidden under his robe, and inside there was a white bird, either a dove or a pigeon. To the uninitiated, this bird would appear as a symbol of peace, purity, and hope. But to Gene, it was something darker, a sacrifice. The man instructed Diddy to release the bird into the air to allow it to fly free, perhaps as a symbol of Diddy's own freedom. But when Diddy threw the bird up, it did not soar. It didn't even struggle to escape. Instead, it fell with a sickening thud to the ground. It was dead. The moment the bird hit the earth, Gene said he felt a cold chill run through his body. He couldn't explain it at the time, but there was something deeply wrong about what had just happened. In his world, in the world of power, money, and influence, a dead bird was no simple accident. It was a bad omen. It was a symbol of death, of sacrifice, and in that moment, Gene believed that the life of the bird had been traded for Diddy's freedom. The ritual had taken place. The judgment had been shifted, not from Diddy to the jury, but from Diddy to the bird. The bird had taken the fall, absorbing the negative energy that had once been aimed at Diddy, taking on the consequences so that he wouldn't have to. Gene watched as Diddy stood up, brushing the dirt from his knees with a look of resolve. The bird lay motionless on the ground, a lifeless symbol of a price paid. Diddy, unbothered by the death that had just occurred, turned and walked away, heading straight for the courthouse to hear the fate of his trial. He didn't look back. He didn't even seem to acknowledge what had just happened in the park. When the verdict came in, the jury declared Diddy not guilty. He was free, freer than he had been in weeks, maybe even months. Gene says that moment was a turning point for him. Diddy walked out of that courtroom with the weight of the world lifted from his shoulders, back to the life of luxury and power that he had so carefully crafted for himself. He continued to key millions, building his empire, stacking up success after success. But Gene knew the price of that freedom. Someone had to pay. The bird had taken the fall for Diddy's freedom. It was the price of his acquittal. And while Diddy moved on to conquer the world, Gene couldn't shake the feeling that the world had shifted in ways they couldn't understand. He knew that the cost of success wasn't just money and power. There was always a price, a hidden cost that few people ever saw, and that price had been paid by an innocent creature, its life snuffed out in the name of Diddy's freedom. Gene would never forget that moment, and though the world would never truly know what happened in that park, Gene knew the truth. The bird had taken Diddy's sins, his guilt, his judgment, and had paid the ultimate price. But in this world of power and influence, only the strong and the powerful walked free. And the rest, they were left behind in the shadows, their stories never told. The courtroom that day was the final stage in a tragic performance, a play in which the rules were rigged, the players manipulated, and the consequences dire. While Diddy walked out a free man, the young rapper Shine, who had simply been trying to make it in the world of hip-hop, was left to face the music. He was found guilty of assault and gun possession, sentenced to 10 long years in prison. The ritual had worked. The bird had taken the fall for Diddy, but the price was much higher than anyone could have imagined. Shine was the one who paid the ultimate cost. Gene Deal believes that the entire outcome was orchestrated to protect the boss at the expense of the soldier. The ritual had spared Diddy, but it had done so at the price of someone else's future. Gene recalls a meeting before the trial where a tempting offer was made to Shine, $20,000 to ensure that everyone would walk free. A bribe, a promise of safety in exchange for loyalty. But Shine, either unable to trust the offer or unable to pay, rejected it. Gene says that's when things began to spiral out of control. Diddy's security team was allegedly behind the manipulation of the witnesses, coaching them on what to say. These false testimonies painted Shine as the wild gunman, the one who had opened fire in the club, the one who had endangered everyone. The witnesses, under the pressure of Diddy's powerful team, claimed they saw Shine pulling the trigger, creating a narrative where Diddy was the innocent bystander, a victim of the violence, while Shine was the sole perpetrator. For Gene, this was nothing short of betrayal. Shine had looked up to Diddy. He had followed him, loyal and eager to prove himself. But in the end, he was thrown under the bus, sold out by the very people he trusted most. As the trial concluded, the scales of justice were tipped, and Shine was sentenced to a maximum security prison. Almost 9 years of his life were spent behind bars, locked away in a cell while the world outside moved on without him. Meanwhile, Diddy, free, untouchable, and unfazed, was living a life most could only dream of, partying on yachts in Saint-Tropez, continuing to build his empire untouched by the consequences of his actions. When Shine was finally released from prison, the world he returned to was nothing like the one he had left behind. Because Shine wasn't a U.S. citizen, he was immediately deported to Belize, his career shattered beyond repair. The bright future he had once had was now a distant memory. For years, Shine held a bitter grudge against Diddy. He saw the betrayal for what it was, a ruthless power play, one that had destroyed his life in exchange for Diddy's freedom. But over time, Shine came to terms with what had happened. Eventually, he forgave Diddy, finding peace and moving forward with his life. Yet for Gene Deal, the story is far from over. He believes that the betrayal and the sacrifice should never be forgotten. The cost of Diddy's success, his wealth, his freedom, his continued rise to power came at a steep price. Gene sees the bird sacrifice in Central Park and the betrayal in the courtroom as two sides of the same coin, one that exposes a much darker, hidden truth about the lengths Diddy went to maintain his grip on power. It's a truth few are willing to acknowledge, a truth about the price of fame, success, and survival in a cutthroat world where only the strongest walk free. Gene goes further, speaking of the tragic end of Anthony Wolf Jones, Diddy's former head of security. Gene believes that the story of Wolf's demise is deeply intertwined with the dark side of Diddy's empire, a part of the narrative that's never truly been told. Wolf, who had been one of Diddy's most trusted confidants, met a tragic end under mysterious circumstances, and Gene isn't afraid to speak the truth about it. He knows that the power structure at Bad Boy went much deeper than anyone could have realized. The empire Diddy built wasn't just a collection of hit records and lavish parties, it was built on a foundation of secrets, lies, and, as Gene believes, sacrifices. Gene Deal doesn't just want to expose the hidden truths of Diddy's empire. He wants people to understand the cost, the human cost of building something that seems so perfect from the outside. He speaks not just for himself, but for those who were betrayed, those who sacrificed everything for the empire, only to be left behind. And in doing so, Gene is forcing the world to confront a darker side of success, one where not everyone gets to win, and where the price of freedom is often paid in ways no one could ever imagine.